Welcome to On the Road, Alan Ivy, July 3rd entry. As I said in the last episode, we're going to be pretty extemporaneous and spontaneous with this. So, on the one hand, you might have to bear with me as I go through the various points. But the thing that came to my mind recently was I was looking over this Elk Speaks book. And one of the things about the book is I know that it's extremely, or shall we say, it is said it is extremely revered among Native Americans and such, but I haven't really seen that per se. Maybe among, certain New Age types, but on the whole, this book has not been exactly something you hear about all the time when you're, checking out Native American type literature and commentary. But in the introduction, here's something I'm going to read to you. Black Elk shared his visions with John Yart because he wished to pass along to future generations some of the reality of Oglala life, and one suspects to share the burden of visions that remain unfulfilled with a compatible spirit. Black Elk might have been greatly surprised at the popularity of the book today. He could not help but be pleased by it. If the old camp circle, the sacred hoop of the Lakota, and the old days have been rudely shattered by the machines of a scientific era, and if they can be no more in the traditional sense, the universality of the images and dreams must testify to the emergence of a new sacred hoop. Now that's a pretty good, shall we say, inspiring wording, typical for an introduction, I would imagine, but I doubt that that's the way Black Elk spoke. And also, the Native Americans that I have run into in my life, I'm 71, so I've run into some. Most of them stress one thing, which is a lot of these books are actually valuable for Caucasians and Western societies to understand, or at least develop a sympathy to be open to a more positive view of the Native American and their experience. Okay. But you don't see Native Americans quoting this type of literature all the time, right? And here's one other. We're going to go back before I give you the example that I think explains the shall we say, the contrast between a Western view and translation of Native American philosophy, or, this was an autobiography, right? It just happened to have some philosophical statements. An earlier book, The Last of the Mohicans, which has been turned kind of into an adventure story, it actually has some revealing aspects about Native American culture, or more importantly, what Cooper felt was the perception of the Native American by those sympathetic to the various tribes, which other books later would call them Indian lovers. But it says here, this is James Fenimore Cooper, few men exhibit greater diversity, or if we may so express it, greater antithesis of character than the native warrior of North America. In war, he is daring, boastful, cunning, ruthless, self-denying, and self-devoted. In peace, just, generous, hospitable, revengeful, superstitious, modest, and commonly chaste. Now, that's, you can take that for what it is, but in other words, it's a literary look. It's probably no different than calling Native Americans savages. You know what I mean? It basically imposes a one image fits all type thing. And the reason that I'm being skeptical is that I have a Japanese equivalent. I'm Japanese American, incidentally. And I read Japanese literature. And I grew up with Japanese movies and all that. And I know that, say with my mother, she always was puzzled by some of the perceptions and judgments that Western people make about Japanese literature and art. For example, when you hear Americans discuss Kurosawa, for example, the most famous of the directors, to Western people, okay, not to Japanese audiences, but to Western audiences. My mother revered him. She loved his movies, but she actually had other types of movies that she preferred to watch, or at least considered to be just as entertaining. In other words, as human beings, Japanese people like to, enjoy a wide variety of entertainments, from the frivolous to the serious. Probably no more than a Western person, or one that considers themselves well-rounded. it goes back, one memory I have is when I was much younger, the Buddhist church used to have what they call a Saturday night movie night. And they would have movies brought over from Japan. And sometimes there were Kurosawa movies, but as a general rule, they brought basically a mix of samurai movies and soap operas. And for most of my life, until I became, shall we say, in my late teen years, when I started reading more, shall we say, literature and commentary about literature, that I realized that there was a perception about Japanese art and literature that Westerners considered it very serious, when most of my life, until my teenage years and through my parents, it was much more well-rounded and just as based in entertainment as it was in, shall we say, a serious study or some kind of self-reflection. So one good example is there's a Japanese book called The Secret History of the Lord of Musashi by Junichiro Tanizaki. And let's see, the edition I've got is, let's see, give me a moment here to go to that page. Charles E. Tuttle Company. And it was printed in Tokyo, and the copyright original is 1931, and the edition I'm reading is 1982 paperback. And now here's an interesting thing. Okay, this is about, you have this picture, these serious Japanese authors, like Mishima and what have you, and the deep psychological aspect of their books that when you read Western commentary permeates all books. Okay? Now here it says, The Secret History of the Lord of Musashi and the Creation of the Passionate and Tormented Lady Kikyo. Reading from the book, as it supplements the staid Confucian histories, The Secret History also burlesques them. The same aspects of life that the Confucian historians piously omitted from their accounts, Tanizaki presents an outrageous exaggeration. The narrator never questions the veracity of the preposterous events he has uncovered, though he questions the motivation of the Lord of Musashi's biographers and speculates cautiously on the Lord's psychology. At the same time, he seems to be parodying his own sadomasochistic writings as he does in the Diary of an Old Man. This ability to laugh at himself publicly is one of Tanizaki's most attractive qualities. Now, that's not necessarily a statement you're going to hear when people are discussing, say, Kurosawa, who, to be clear, was one of the great directors of all time. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find there's a lot of Japanese directors that are esteemed just as much in Japan, maybe not in America. And you hear people discussing the samurai and the Bushido code. And if you see, like, for example, with the movie The Last Samurai, and you see how it's discussed, and for, several decades, when people commented on the samurai, it was basically these strong, often vicious warriors with their extremely subservient wives and the downtrodden peasants. And it omits, if you look at Japan from a Japanese person's point of view, yes, the samurai were an element that by the time World War II came, there were a great deal of Japanese that would like to have seen that class of society at least neutered. Okay, I mean, they had to follow them to war. They did follow a certain inspiration, but there was a very definite undercurrent of resistance, developing, probably as the casualties mounted. Just like in America, when the casualties mounted with the Vietnam War, then you started to get a little more, shall we say, objections to the war itself. The patriotism started to fade. And if you were to ask my mother about the samurai back in the early 60s, when we were watching these movies and so on, she'd have given you a different picture because she grew up in Japan. She was as a kid. And her picture of the samurai were, you had the samurai warriors, you had the samurai women, who incidentally were generally in command of the fort when the samurai husband went off to war. Okay, in other words, the wife was the second in command in a lot of ways. She definitely ran the fort. And there's an old saying that she says, the man runs the family, but the woman runs the house. And and this wasn't an absolute. Basically, you definitely had a lot of, shall we say, chauvinistic males, and the same amount of males who loved their wives and basically treated them like equal human beings. It's about the same as American. You wouldn't think so the way Japanese men are described or Asian males are described, but it was certainly like when I visited Japan as a young teenager. I didn't see a bunch of stern men ordering women around. I saw some, but as a general rule, I saw the families that were kind of like a unit, and they loved each other, and they had a balance. And the wife, as often as not, would scold the husbands for this or that. If they did something like get drunk during the party too much in front of the kids or something like that, the wife would, chew the guy out, and the guy would listen respectfully. So, that's not the picture you're going to get in America, okay? But to a Japanese person, I look at a lot of the Western description of Japanese culture, and I think that there's a lot of people who are projecting their own image of Asian people into the, right? So they've got these incredibly brave, suicidal samurai and blah, 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 blah. When the Japanese people saw them as much more of a mixed type of experience where you had some noble ones and you had some real, creepy ones and so on and so on. And, a lot of them were bloodthirsty, and the nobility of it was just like with, say, chivalry in Europe. Okay, it was extremely mythologized. Right? There was a lot of mythology to it, and it was romanticized. And in reality, it was an honor code that was sometimes obeyed and sometimes not. And there was certainly no punishment for not doing it. Now, circling back to Native American literature and such, anytime I've heard Native Americans talk or in their commentary, they tend to speak a great deal of the oral tradition. Okay, so this description of Black Elk wanting to have his visions preserved in print for his people through books sold at retail and what have you, that doesn't quite make it. It certainly would look like that from a Western point of view, where things are kind of built around commercialism, like, a successful author has someone that's selling a lot of books. And if he sells a lot of books, therefore he is a great author. And you occasionally allow writers like Henry Miller to be these great rebels, but only because later on they did sell a lot of books. And there's a lot of authors that probably are out there that didn't sell very many books, and they were probably brilliant, but we'll never know because that's not what Western culture looks at. Okay, they tend to, there's definitely something about success. And in the case of Native American culture, if you notice, like with movies and stuff, it seems like a lot of audiences prefer to hear it through their own race. They would prefer to see white people write these stories or write the screenplays, and they may hire Native Americans to do it. Okay, but the money and the artistic direction often comes from Westerners, we'll call it. We won't say just race, but Westerners. And like I said, when I think about how samurais are depicted, and I see these various Japanese novels that I read, and they have a variety of emotional tones. From one famous novel, Bochan from Soseki, it's a story about a guy who's just a real nonconformist. Okay, that's not an image you see in Japan, the Western image of Japan. In Japan, it's actually quite common. Okay, in Japan, I was used to seeing guys making just as many crappy remarks about the government and corruption, and making fun of samurai that were overmuch, overbearing, or that over-patriotic thing. There was just as many sarcastic remarks made about them as were respectful. In other words, just like American society would be, or British. It's basically the Western culture that makes it look like the Japanese are all these bunch of people who are meditating all the time, and they're ants. They're an ant colony, and they all think the same, blah, 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 blah. That's not true. It's not what I saw when I was in Japan. It's not what I grew up with. And when I read these descriptions of various samurai culture and Japanese books, I just kind of wonder where they get the information from. Basically, a lot of these historians, I guess a good way to look at it is, a lot of these historians only know what they've read. Okay, they don't know what they've lived. Okay, they don't know what Japanese people have lived all their lives and heard. Okay, they just know what they've read, and the gaps and interpretations are theirs. And so they project, for example, that, good one. A lot of white males think that a lot of Japanese women are completely subservient and passive. A lot of white women think that too. In other words, they kind of have that geisha image. But that's not my mother, and that's not my sisters, and that's not a lot of women I saw. Okay, they were no different than American women in the respect that they tended to expect to have their input in the running of a family or whatever, and they had their own minds. Okay, they weren't polite little people that just sat there quietly until spoken to. Okay, perhaps in a movie by Westerners, or perhaps how Westerners perceive it. Okay, but when it comes right down to it, a lot of Japanese don't even talk like they do in the movies with that kind of weird accent when they're trying to speak English. Okay, they don't talk like that all the time. Okay, it's just a movie stereotype, but it translates to life. And so it does with these books like Black Elk Speaks. They're valuable because they're definitely historical, but you have to kind of look at it from the point of view of, shall we say, some works that perhaps should not be taken literally. Okay, and we can also look at, say, books like The Last of the Mohicans, which has now become a big adventure film, and Hawkeye's this Western guy, and the Indians are these faithful Tonto assistants. But if you read the book, not the movie, but the book, you'll find that the Pathfinder was actually a man who was approaching middle age and considered himself somewhat of a sage, and definitely, of course, a woodsman. And one of the main characters in the book that was omitted in the movie was David, a young preacher. And the Pathfinder and David would often have these conversations throughout the book. And David had to come from his black and white interpretation of the Bible throughout the book as he came to understand more of, shall we say, the application to human life and to people like the Native Americans who absolutely had a different reality. But he and the Pathfinder had some interesting discussions. And at first he didn't quite take the Pathfinder's references to God that seriously. But there's a passage in here where the Pathfinder tells David, when I look at the forest and I look at the nature here, the landscape, for him, that was proof of God. Now it's probably a little bit of a naturism there, but nonetheless, for him, it was a proof of God. Okay, a being capable of these kind of works. Okay? And David did see that. Okay, now you didn't see that in the movie. Okay, in the movie, the guy was this kind of macho guy, But in the book, if you want to read the book, you get past the Western criticisms that it's overly wordy and corny and blah, blah, blah. You'll find that the Native Americans here are actually the main characters. The story is very much told through their eyes. But by the time it got to, shall we say, the film and a screenplay written by Westerners, it was a macho frontiersman and his faithful Tontos. And as I described with the samurai, it's these noble but often cruel people with their obedient people, like women and such, crawling on the ground with their foreheads on the ground in front of them. When in reality, a lot of these samurai were actually quite in debt to the middle class and merchants for money to get money advanced on their rice stipend from the nobles. They were often in debt to these merchants and stuff. Okay, and circling back to the Black Elk Speaks and another like the autobiography of Geronimo, I think it's important to read the book and read it for what it is. It is the Native American experience and culture expressed through that particular person, but filtered. You have to understand that it's been filtered through a Western mind, and it doesn't matter how sympathetic he may feel. Okay, it's going to be filtered through a Western mind. And that's why you would have James Fenimore Cooper think of all of the Native Americans as being this incredibly noble in peace thing and incredibly vicious in war thing. In other words, a stereotype. And if you read a lot of the different accounts of Native American tribes, you'll find they're very different. Their cultures and what have you. And it was the same in Japan, different regions and what have you. In fact, let me give you a story that may seem, off the subject, but it kind of sort of is. I remember one time we were watching a samurai film, and the guy was like talking. The peasant was talking excitedly about something, and it wasn't technically a funny moment. It was like a serious thing. The guy was really concerned. He was telling the samurai hero something. And my mother started to burst out laughing. And I was this kid, and I was like, well, I was curious. I asked my mom, I said, what did he say that was so funny? And she said, oh, no, it's not that. He has such a hillbilly accent that it sounds funny. And I said, Japanese have hillbillies? And she goes, sure. Yeah, the people out in the rural farms and stuff, they're hillbillies. They talk like hillbillies. You know, the Japanese have accents, okay? And so that story, in a way, you can extrapolate that back to these 3 books that I talked about. There's perception, and there's how it's looked at from people who've lived it. And so I would recommend reading all these books: Black Elk Speaks, Last of the Mohicans, The Secret History of the Lord of Musashi, Autobiography of Geronimo. But just remember who is talking, who's interpreting, and to make sure that that's not the only source. And if the reading of Black Elk Speaks leads you to reading more from actual Native Americans, I think that is part of a great overall picture, and the book has done what it was hoping to do. Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope it didn't go on too long here on July 3rd. I hope you all have a great holiday, and I hope you enjoy this new format. Take care.